you see. But America it will become less overtly racist to the point where we become less useful to it. In other words, we're not going to block you from having freedom to do things, but the deal is you won't have money to do it. And so, we're going to create fair everything, except the situation is you won't be in a position to take advantage of it. So the issue then won't be so much our oppression and overt racist oppression, but our absolute uselessness in an automated society, in a global economic system. In fact, the issue now has moved to a degree beyond racism, to a degree having to deal with the economic structuring of the world and of the society. He goes on to say, increasingly, he is not so much economically exploited as he is irrelevant. The tremendous historical change is taking place in these terms. He is not needed. He is not so much oppressed as unwanted. Not so much unwanted as unnecessary. Not so much abused as ignored. The dominant whites no longer need to exploit the black minority. As automation proceeds, it will be easier for the former to disregard the latter. In short, white America, by a more perfect application of mechanization and a vigorous reliance upon automation, disposes of the Negro. Consequently, the Negro transforms from an exploited labor force into an outcast. The Negro's anguish does not rise only out of brutalities of past oppression. The anxiety stems more than ever before out of being discarded as a waste product of technological production. And this is the world that we are facing. And therefore, being caught up in terms of racism is an obsolete fight. It is time now to deal with the economic and social realities of the world.
Happy Monday, happy Monday, happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, continuing my reading of Dr. Amos Wilson's seminal book, Blueprint for Black Power, a moral, political, and economic imperative for the 21st century. And this is chapter 12, pages 280 to 294. Pages 280 to 294, and this will conclude chapter 12. And chapter 12 is the economic order and power. In the last two videos, we were talking about structured power, using institutions, using economics, using structures to funnel your power, creating power, and then funneling your power, maximizing your power, using vessels to direct your power. And so Dr. Wilson is trying to get us to take a look at the landscape and realize what power actually is and how power is actually really used. Because we want power, but do we really understand what it is? And that is the inappropriate behavior that Dr. Todd Anderson, that is the behavior traits that Dr. Amos Wilson has been teaching us about. That's why he wrote this book, so we can counter that first half, or what we begin reading is for us to understand what's going on. And now it's about the application. So the economic order and power, right? Dr. Wilson is arguing that economics is not simply about money. It is about organized power. Economics is not simply about money. Economics is about organized power. So I'm going to read a few sections of the rest of the chapter. Go ahead and close this chapter out. And then I'm going to transition to video showing about how organized power is actually used in the economic plan. And I'm going to use that as I go through our key points. All right. So this is how we're getting it in, because we want to make sure we understand what's happening to us, right? So many people think wealth is measured by how much money an individual has. Dr. Wilson argues that this is an illusion. Real wealth is measured by ownership, production, organization, and institutional control. Once again, real wealth is measured by ownership, production, organization, and institutional control. Throughout history, groups that dominate economically also dominate politically, culturally, educationally, militarily, and psychologically. Politically, culturally, educationally, militarily, and psychologically. The greatest mistake oppressed people make is believing that individual financial success equals collective freedom. And we do it all the time. We think because Oprah and all these other people got money that black people are doing good. That's not what that means. 1 millionaire cannot liberate 10 million poor people. Economic liberation comes from institutions. And that's why we have to not only build institutions, but support institutions and grow them and nurture them. So that's how you build. So I'm actually going to start my reading on page 286. This section is 280 to 294, but I'm going to start my reading on 286 so it could be more concise. And then, like I said, we're going to transition to the video and the key points. So this section is taking charge of economic destiny. Page 286. It is clear from this analysis and any number of similar ones that the African American community must become much more self-centered and active in seeking to it that blacks are hired in rapidly increasing numbers at all levels in corporate America. In light of our tenure in America, our social and military sacrifices to its growth, development, security, and greatness in light of the fact that America, against the will of our ancestors, is our native land, in the scene that we are born here and can claim no other country, and therefore are mystically and historically attached to it, regardless of our traumatically ostracized relationship with it. We should justifiably and loudly demand that we be first in line to receive its benefits. We have not been repaired from our contributions to America, whether extorted from or voluntarily shared by us. We have never been the enemy of America in its wars, whether of imperial conquest or in self-defense. And yet we are told that those people we're told that those people not only have not paid the price we have paid to become first-class citizens in America, but many of whom at one time were its enemies are as immigrants allowed to enjoy rights not only equal to our own, but to boast superior privileges. We should not let cries of reverse racism or our own rhetoric regarding racial equality and our sincere commitment to it prevent us from demanding our rightful and proportionate returns on our heavy investment in this nation. We, its foundation, must be determined not to be treated as if we are mere immigrants. The structured charges going on the American global economy require that the African American community not only accesses vulnerability to economic poor health, but must proactively deal with this problem aggressively. It must aptly deal with the fact that its constituents tend to be heavily concentrated in the most expendable jobs. As intimated by the Wall Street Journal, more than half of all black workers held positions in their 4 job categories where companies made net employment cuts, office and clerical, skilled, semi-skilled, and laborers, according to the EEOC records. If this situation is to be rectified before half or more of the black workforce is to be dismissed and the African American community be economically and socially devastated, educational levels, skills, training, and experience of its workers and future workers. Moreover, it must take charge of its own economic destiny, put its economic and cultural house in order, and act to actualize its enormous economic and political potential. Capitalism as a system of social relations. As I guide through this economic space, we have chosen the noted economists Robert L. Heilbroner, Norman Thomas, professor of economics in the New School for Social Research. Heilbroner seems to corroborate our earlier contention that the economic system is not one wherein capital or money as capital is merely possessed individually by the members of a community. than an economic system is more fundamentally a social system, a system of organized social relations within a community of persons. He argues persuasively that capital is therefore not a material thing, but a process. It is moreover a social process, not a physical one. Hellbronner goes on to argue that money in itself is not capital. It is money in use that is capital. Money in use is capital, like applied power, right? Capital is a web of social activities that permit the continuous metamorphosis of MCM, the process of a continuous transformation of capital as commodities, followed by a retransformation of capital as commodities into more capital as more money take place. He elaborates further. At the center of this process is the social relationship between the runners of money and goods and the monetary embodiments of capital and the users of its embodiments who need them to carry on the activity of production in which their own livelihoods depend. The legal crux of the relationship lies in the right of exclusion, a central, although often ignored, meaning of property is that its owners can legally refuse to allow their possessions to be used by others. Hellbronner contends that it is the right of the owners of money or capital goods as private property to withhold them from use as their owners see fit. It is the right that enables the capitalist to dominate the sphere of trade and production in which its authorities extends. Cutting to the chase, he outrightly contends that the idea of capital as a social relationship leads directly to the core of that relationship. Domination is the relationship, right? Readily admitting that power wielded by the capital differs in subtle but substantial ways from owners of other aspects of social authority or coercive power under social conditions that make the withholding of capital an act of critical social consequence. Capital can exert its organizing and disciplining influence on the state, individuals, and groups in its commercial, social, and political interests. More directly to the point, Hellbronner delineates the source of the dominant power of capital, coincidentally the dominant power of whites over blacks. The domination of capital hinges on the appearance of a class of workers who are dependent on their livelihood on access to the tools and land that have been legally denied to them by their owners. The relationship of domination has two poles. One of them, the social dependency of the propertyless men and women without which capital could not exert its organizing influence, and the other is the restless and insatiable drive to accumulate capital. Hellbronner further contends that while the possession of substantial capital may or may not confer on its owners good repute, authority, or prestige, it does confer on them the ability to direct and mobilize the activities of society. It also confers on them, the owners of the goods, that constitute wealth, and an attribute that goes beyond prestige and prominence. There is power. He rightly concludes that wealth is therefore a social category inseparable from power, and he again points to the unadorned social economic basis for this power. Per contra, wealth can only come into existence when the right of access of all members of society to an independent livelihood no longer prevails, so that control over this access becomes life-giving importance. The corollary is that wealth cannot exist unless there also exists a condition of scarcity, not insufficiency of resources themselves, but insufficiency of means of access to resources. As Adam Smith put it, wherever there is a great property, there is great inequality. For one very rich man, there must be at least 500 poor, and the affluence of the rich supposes the indigence of the many. Domination in human society, Hellbronner cognitively points out, entails a structural inequality of life, conditions that has no parallel in the animal world. Moreover, he frankly reminds us that the insatiable drive to amass wealth, which is probably the most obvious characteristic of capitalism and of the capitalist, is inextricable from the power and incomprehensible except as a form of power. He says elsewhere that these processes of accumulating capital is pursued in part because it is the manner in which the dominant class expresses and renews its social control. He pointedly asserts that capitalism is the regime of capital, the form of rulership we find when power takes the remarkable aspect of the domination by those who control access to the means of production of the great majority who must gain employment. It should be an obvious and compelling conclusion that if African Americans and Africans across the diaspora are to achieve their liberation from white domination, whose ruling instrument is the regime of capital, they must either overthrow or subvert white capitalism, bringing it crashing like Humpty Dumpty, hard to earth, or masterfully wrest it from the hands of their white masters and victoriously fight fire with fire. But before we blare the Darien call of final battle, we must honestly assess our current position, resources, and potentialities to those of our adversaries, for it is from such assessments a winning set of strategies and tactics must be derived. Understanding what your enemy is really doing, understanding the true system of capitalism, how capitalism really works, how worth happens, how the whole system happens, the transaction, how money is actually given the power that it has, like the government has the power that it has. We have to understand how much we play a part in this, how willing we are to play this game, but play this game from a loser standpoint. Because, I hear a lot of people giving their critiques on capitalism, and they give their critiques on capitalism from a oppressed standpoint, but not from a standpoint of people with power, because capitalism can be used in a way to empower people. But it depends on the mindset, the tactics, the strategy, the framework, all these different things of the people who utilize the system of capitalism. And in this system, are you on top? Are you in power, or are you oppressed? Because all of this just comes down to how the owners or how the controllers use it. The people who have control of these systems, how they use these systems. That's what it really comes down to, right? But also that's what Dr. Wilson is telling us about economics. How are you using your economics? You may drive a Benz. You may have a nice house. You may have nice clothes. You may go on vacations. You may eat at the fancy restaurants. You may do all the fancy people stuff. But what do you own and control? What institutions do you own and control? What systems do you own and control? Us as Black people, we may have a handful of millionaires. We may have a handful of billionaires. But is that aggregated into any kind of collective power that helps us move ourselves forward as a group? Or are those people themselves just being advanced by the economics that they've been able to acquire? And I'm not telling nobody not to get their money. Get your money. But we have to get our money in a collective fashion. The framework isn't there. The code of conduct isn't there. And so this part of the chapter is called, this is page 289. This is a contrarian viewpoint. Not all economists agree with the contention that the reconfiguration of the U.S. workforce is primarily due to foreign competition, increased imports, and foreign direct investments. Paul Krugman, professor of economics at Stanford University, is one of the most prominent of these. In a recent article in the prestigious journal Foreign Policy, Krugman makes the following argument. Most people who worry about the growing earnings disparities in the United States are raising unemployment in Europe, blamed for those trends on international trade. The pressure of global competition, in particular from the newly industrializing companies with their much lower wage rules, is widely believed to be the fundamental cause of the decline in wages and jobs of the less skilled, right? This is an undesirable view. In principle, it is entirely possible that increased trades with countries teeming with cheap labor could drive down the real wages of less skilled workers in the West. It is also true that trade in general and the manufactured exports of the third world in particular have increased rapidly since the 1970s. From that perspective, the hypothesis that international trade is at the heart of the story is highly persuasive. Unfortunately, it is not true. A number of careful studies have come to the conclusion that international trade explains at best only a small fraction of the rise in earnings inequality in the United States or the employment problems in Europe. The basic point in all these studies is that if international trade reduces an economy's demand for unskilled labor, it does so by changing the industrial mix. That is, if the United States responds to growing world economic integration by producing more skilled intensive goods like aircraft and fewer goods like garments that employ primarily unskilled workers, the effect will be to raise the demand for skilled workers while reducing it for unskilled, and hence to bid up the wages of the former and drive down the wages of the latter. In fact, however, very little of the decline in the relative demand for unskilled labor in Western countries has been due to changes in the mix of goods produced. Instead, unemployment has shifted noticeably toward skilled employment within each industry, including those normalized industries accounting for about 2/3 of the U.S. employment and are largely insulted from the international competition. The pervasiveness of the shift toward highly skilled labor suggests that the explanation for growing inequality lies not in international trade, which affects labor demand by changing the mix of industries, but in technological changes that have reduced the demand for the worst paid workers in all industries. At a time of the production of this volume, the U.S. economy is undergoing a fairly strong economic recovery. Unemployment is declining rather steadily. For many, particularly in the African American community, this appears to be good news. But appearances can be deceiving. Krugman spoke of the appearance of the current recovery industry. As this article was being written, the Bureau of Labor Statistics announced a sharp fall in the U.S. unemployment rate. Most economists expect that rate to decline even further, eventually approaching the 55% level generally regarded as full employment. It is also probable that, through by no means certain, that within a year or two, recovery will begin in Europe and Japan. As growth accelerates and the number of jobless falls, much of the current dependency over the state of the world economy will surely dissipate. Stories about those jobless recoveries will fade from the press to be replaced by upbeat tales of business success. All right. We got to understand. It's like the me, Pat, and PC did a video maybe a year or two ago. It was about how a useless class will be created of those who are underskilled or the skillless. Think about certain jobs that certain people have to take because of the lack of skills, the lack of knowledge, the lack of the education that's properly needed to give these people skills that can go beyond the menial labor, things that can be replaced by automation. Even in this book, early in these chapters, he's talking about being replaced by automation. So even in the 90s, that was talking about being replaced by automation. But yet we still have generations and generations and generations of black folk who either are not skilled or who are less skilled. When we need to be building specific skill sets that can translate to an ever-changing job market. Building skill sets that are going to be needed no matter what. But also creating an economy, creating an infrastructure, creating an environment for the economic growth of us as black people. Instead of expecting the same people who oppress us to liberate us economically, when they're clearly using their institutions to build their power and make sure we have none. And we're finna get further into that. So let me finish this last part of this reading. It is the economic future of the African American community. Whether the reader accepts our earlier general analysis of the changing character of the American workforce, American unemployment trends and income inequalities on Krugman's analysis, the outcome for the African American community is generally the same. High levels of unemployment and underemployment Even with full employment, the unemployment rate for the Black community will average around 13%. This point is corroborated by an analysis of this manner by economist Andrew F. Bremer, former member of the Federal Reserve Board, now president of Bremer and Co. His analysis is reported by Black Enterprise in an article titled "No Real Recovery for Black Jobs or Incomes," includes the following information. All right. The economy is picking up steam. However, economist Andrew F. Bremer, president of Bremer and Co., says that while the progress of Black Americans will improve slightly, the Black population and labor force will grow faster than their share of employment and income. Let me read that again. The progress of Black Americans will improve slightly. The Black population and labor force will grow faster than their share of employment and income. As a result, he predicts the jobs and income deficits which Blacks suffer will widen further. This year, the Black civilian labor force should grow to 14.4 million or 11.1% of the total workforce versus 14.1 million or 11% of the total in 1993. African American unemployment, meanwhile, is likely to hit 12.6 million or 10.32% of total employment versus 12.2 million or 10.2% of the last year. This means that there will be nearly 1 million more Black workers in 1994 than there are jobs for them. As the nation's gross domestic product picks up, Black unemployment will be slightly lower than last year, but it will stand at 2.27 times that of whites. Black joblessness is projected to average 1.8 million in 1994, or 23.2% of all those unemployed versus 1.89 million or 21.7% last year. That translates into a Black unemployment rate of 12.7% this year versus 13.4% in 1993. By contrast, total unemployment by the U.S. may dip to 6.1 for all workers and 6.7 last year, and 5.2 for whites and 5.9 in 1993. On the bright side, if Black employment grows, so does Black money income. Of course, the parity share of money income would be larger if Blacks were employed in numbers equal to their share of the civilian labor force. In 1994, the total U.S. money income is projected to be 4.17 trillion, and the Black share may rise to 319.8 billion or 7.7% of the total U.S. income versus 300.6 billion or 7.6 last year. If Blacks received a parity share of income, their share would raise by 142.6 billion more this year. The average unemployment rate for African American teenagers and young adults is likely to be many times higher than the average rate for Blacks as a whole. Many members of the Black community who will be employed will be part-time employers or will be employed at minimum wages. Many will belong to the class of the working poor. This implies that the African American community must fully and vigorously exercise a few options it has available to it. These options include a more effective push for affirmative action and struggle against racial discrimination in the workplace, a massive increase in the quality of African American human resources, i.e. increases in the level of job skills, training, and education, political agitation for the passage of earned income tax credit or negative income tax credit legislation, the provision of income supports that gradually taper off as income raises, and the increase of Black wealth and employment through the economic expansion of the Black community, mainly through the ownership of business enterprises that equity investments in income earning resources. We shall discuss the later option through the rest of this volume. And that ends chapter 12. So, next week we're on chapter 13, and chapter 13 is short chapter, pages 295 to 306. So next week, chapter 13, page 295 to 306. Got to get our economics together. Right? We got to get our minds together. We got to understand the landscape, understand the game, understand how things play, understand why institutions, organizations, Strategy is important. Code of conduct is important. People working together is important. Racism is a team sport. Play it as an individual if you want. We still gonna lose. So let's get into these main points and get into this video I want to show you, right? So the first main point is economics is organized behavior. Economics is organized behavior. Wilson explains that economics is really the science of organizing resources. Economics is the science of organizing resources. This includes labor, land, technology, knowledge, capital, production, transportation, distribution, and communication. One more time. Labor, land, technology, knowledge, capital, production, transportation, distribution, and communication. Whoever organizes these controls society. Money simply follows organization. Money simply follows organization. So let's look at this. And
Microsoft, Apple, General Motors, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, General Motors, titans of industry, right? Think again. Behind those giants lurks a company quietly pulling the corporate strings from the shadows. You've never bought their product, but their influence you can't escape. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're revealing the mysterious company known as BlackRock. It takes a lot to become one of the most powerful companies in the world.
Economics is the science of organizing resources. BlackRock controls labor, owns land, controls technology, knowledge, capital, production, transportation, distribution, and communication.
And one of those factors is to be associated with a key product. General Motors sells cars. Apple sells computers. Amazon sells, well, whatever you want delivered to your door as fast as possible. As soon as you say the name of one of those companies, people get an image in their mind, and it's usually a positive one. That's part of the way a company gains staying power that allows them to withstand economic downturns. But BlackRock sells nothing. The main reason many people have never heard of BlackRock is because it's not a company in the traditional sense. Founded in 1988, it didn't launch with a product to sell. It launched with brain power as its selling point. Its 8 founding partners, led by Larry Fink, were all veteran finance and business hands. Their mission statement was to provide institutional clients with asset management services.
Wealth is created. Wilson rejects the idea that wealth magically appears. Instead, wealth is created through production, ownership, labor, technology, natural resources, and organization. Money merely represents claims on wealth. A community can possess millions of dollars yet still produce very little. Likewise, another community can possess enormous productive capacity that continues creating wealth generation after generation. Wilson argues that we must stop confusing wealth and income. So listen to this video because it's explaining how wealth, power, and control is distributed throughout the world right now.
From a risk management perspective, if that doesn't sound particularly interesting, you probably don't have a 10-digit investment portfolio. But the people who do, well, that was exactly what they wanted, and they were willing to pay handsomely for it. BlackRock makes its money through a collection of fees and investment shares granted to it by the companies that it manages. The majority of its income comes from investment advisory and administration fees, but it sells none of its own products or services beyond advice and management.
The difference between income and wealth, and I'm gonna let the video play, but it's hitting on points though. The difference between income and wealth. Income is temporary. Income is always temporary. Wealth produces future income. They're producing wealth. If someone earns $250,000 annually, another person owns apartment buildings, factories, trucking companies, farmland, banks, or the strategies that BlackRock are taking, Wilson would argue that the second person possesses real economic power because ownership produces continuing income. And then a problem in our community, we want quote unquote attractive jobs that look good and sound good. So you make $250,000 doing such and such, but I own apartment buildings, I own factories, I own trucking companies, I own farmlands, I own banks, and average everyday person doing all this, but it don't look fancy, and I don't look fancy. Wilson would argue the second person possesses real economic power because ownership produces continuing income. Ownership controls labor. Ownership controls production. Ownership influences politics. BlackRock.
Despite this, it attracts some of the deepest pocketed companies in the world, seeking its help to minimize risk and make investments in the safest and most secure options. And when you have that many powerful friends, it adds up. And this has turned BlackRock into a shocking powerhouse. Today, BlackRock's portfolio of assets under management is over $13.5 trillion as of the first quarter of 2025. Its net income in that period was $1.5 billion. So whatever they're doing, it's definitely working. This makes it the largest asset management group in the world, more than $1 trillion ahead of American rival Vanguard Group and around double the assets of third-place Fidelity Investments. But it's not just about how much money you have as a corporation of this size, it's about the phone numbers you have. BlackRock's reach extends into some of the most powerful countries on the earth. And as you go about your daily life, chances are you'll cross paths with something or someone tied to them. This isn't just in tech companies either. When you eat, when you shop, when you drive, you're probably playing 6 degrees of separation from BlackRock, or maybe a couple fewer degrees than that.
So, another key point. Institutions matter more than individuals. We keep worrying about individual wealth instead of institutional wealth or institutional control. Wilson repeatedly emphasizes that institutions survive people. Institutions survive people. People die. Institutions remain. Examples include banks, insurance companies, manufacturing firms, schools, investment funds like BlackRock, research centers, agricultural cooperatives. The community that owns institutions maintain power across generations. BlackRock, white America, white supremacy. They own and control institutions. That's why their wealth is continuing to increase the way it is, and ours isn't.
A large part of BlackRock's business plan is to pick up shares of some of the most influential companies around. They don't just want to profit from a company's success, they want to say in how it's run, which raises the question, what does BlackRock actually want? On the surface, BlackRock seems to be a neutral company, which makes sense given its success in getting countless companies to invest with it. Its primary goal is to boost the portfolio of its companies, which benefits BlackRock as well. As such, its investments tend to be very cautious and low risk, without relying too much on any one specific investment that could go bust. The company is seen as somewhat recession-proof as a result. Its low-risk strategy will be seen as even more useful in troubled times. But it's what's behind the curtain that has people worried. BlackRock doesn't own any companies per se, instead having small percentages of massive corporations in exchange for its services. It helps those companies grow and their share becomes more and more valuable as a result. But as BlackRock owns major shares of multiple companies in the same field, that can give them huge sway in the sector. This is nowhere clearer than in big tech. All of BlackRock's largest investments are in this field. They own 5.7% of Microsoft, 5.6% of Apple, nearly 3% of Amazon, and over 2% of Alphabet and Meta. Small numbers on paper, but when the companies are worth trillions, those tiny slices mean enormous power. That gives it a listening ear in just about the entire tech world. But that is not where its influence in tech ends. None of these are actually BlackRock's biggest investment. That goes to NVIDIA Corporation, which BlackRock owns 7.3% of. NVIDIA is a fast-growing semiconductor and computing company that's considered one of the top names in AI, developing the technology for more practical, less user-facing purposes than the more famous OpenAI.
Production versus consumption. Producing versus consuming. One of Wilson's strongest criticisms is that oppressed groups often become excellent consumers instead of producers. All these products, all these things that they're talking about, we consume, especially Amazon. Oh man, people be buying off consumption, right? Consumption entrenches producers. Consumption enriches producers. BlackRock attached themselves to all production companies. And as they get rich, BlackRock gets richer. And as the companies get rich, BlackRock gets richer, the people get poorer, especially black people. Because we're like the #1 consumers, right? Production creates power. He argues people spend enormous amounts supporting businesses owned by others while owning very little themselves. This creates a permanent dependency.
But as controversy continues to mount over AI's growing role in everyday life and the threat that it poses to the creative arts, BlackRock's hand in the pie has made many anti-AI activists very worried. BlackRock also has a 1.6% share in Tesla Inc., giving it the ear of the electric car company's controversial boss, Elon Musk. And that is before getting into how BlackRock has heavy investments in the finance world, owning shares of banking giant JP Morgan Chase & Company, as well as powerhouse credit card companies Visa and MasterCard. It also has investments in some of the largest healthcare companies out there, including drug company Eli Lilly & Co. and Johnson & Johnson. And that is before we get into its holdings in the shopping giant Walmart, entertainment magnate Netflix, and energy powerhouse ExxonMobil. Most of these shares are under 1%, but 1% is a lot of a company that size. And the influence adds up too. No matter what you do, you're interacting with a countless number of these companies a day, and that means you're interacting with BlackRock too. A small percentage of all your purchases flows upstairs to BlackRock, helping the company continue to buy its portfolio.
And that leads to economic dependency. That's that consumption. That's consumption versus production, which leads to economic dependency, right? Wilson explains dependency. He explains dependence creates vulnerability. Being dependent, constantly dependent, leaves you vulnerable. If another group controls your jobs, your banks, your food, your housing, your media, your schools, and BlackRock, we know they're not our people, right? We know all these companies and all these institutions being named, we don't control none of this stuff. Remember, if another group controls your jobs, your banks, your food, your housing, your media, your schools, they possess tremendous influence over your future, and they shape how you think, live, and behave. Economic dependency limits political independence because livelihoods may depend on decisions made by others. Economic dependency limits political independence because livelihoods may depend on decisions made by others. Let's continue.
And on the surface, there's nothing wrong with that. BlackRock is simply a company that owns parts of other companies, offering its expertise in exchange for a passive income stream. But at a certain point, this level of power becomes far more than it appears. And according to many of its critics, we are well past that point. BlackRock's interest in NVIDIA isn't a surprise. It's actually one of the main pioneers in AI software. While it hasn't created anything it's released to the public, it does have one massive innovation of its own, Aladdin, a powerful electronic system that was built by the risk management development of the corporation. First released in 1988, it's been consistently updated since and is one of the company's closely guarded secrets, designed to handle the company's portfolio and analyze it for risks and benefits. After all, it is handling trillions. At last count, Aladdin was handling over $21 trillion in assets, and that requires a massive amount of resources. The program is run through 4 data centers, with one being in Wenatchee, Washington, which has 6,000 computers operating it alone. And these computers have a critical job: analyze everything. They track everything: the markets, world politics, even the weather. Anything that could shake the global economy goes into their decision-making machine. This system is used to make both larger and individual investment decisions, and it's obviously been working. The company continues to be seen as one of the safest places to invest. And BlackRock isn't the only one using it anymore. The powerful AI system, which gets more advanced and precise all the time, has been adopted by major banking systems around the world. In the US, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Israel. It also handles the California Public Employees Retirement System, for which stability is obviously important. Licensing.
Capital must circulate strategically. Capital must circulate strategically. Wilson argues communities should think strategically about where money goes after it is earned. You put 2 and 2 together, you see how they're using Aladdin to make sure their strategies are sufficient enough to continue to grow the company and make the best moves and be ahead of what's going on. The important question becomes, where does the dollar go next? They know where all their money is going, where all their investments are going. $1 trillion company, and they're tracking every cent. If money immediately leaves a community, it generates little lasting benefit there. So we got to think about things a lot more strategically, especially our economics, what economics really is in the political field. If money circulates through locally owned businesses and institutions before leaving, it can support additional jobs, investments, and services. His broader point is about building systems that remain and multiply resources rather than relying on outside providers. Building our own systems that can rival these systems and empower us. Right? Let's get back.
Out this system is one of the many income streams for BlackRock, although its core function is still managing its own portfolio for the many gun-shy investors out there, because many know what it's like to lose everything. How did BlackRock become so big? It partially traces back to the 2008 financial crisis, which was the last gasp of the old way of investment in many ways. Back then, few asset managers were using high-tech software, and they were relying heavily on their own judgment. Not only did many investors lose their shirt because they were invested too heavily in certain areas, whole firms and banks went bust. The entire economy was only saved from collapse by the many fail-safes put in place since the Great Depression, and it caused many to turn toward a safer, more reliable option. And BlackRock was ready to answer the call. BlackRock actually played a key role in helping the government handle toxic assets, and in the aftermath it had a lot of people ready to turn to it for a steady, low-risk investment portfolio. Additionally, it helped to stabilize the economy during the crisis, including managing the balance sheets of failed mortgage banks Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And this won it a lot of favor on both sides of the political aisle. After all, the crisis began under George W. Bush and carried into Barack Obama's first year. Both parties had seen what BlackRock could do, and that kind of success buys a lot of trust. Maybe too much. The question is, what did BlackRock want to do with all that leverage? BlackRock isn't very public with its priorities, but a company of this size and influence likely has contacts across the business and political world. And for some politicians and activists, that's reason enough to be concerned with it. BlackRock is almost impossibly large. It's not the biggest company in the world, not by a long shot, but it handles more money than any of them. In fact, many of those same corporations trust BlackRock to manage their own investments, because its core business is investing. BlackRock pours its clients' money into the world's top companies, making it one of the biggest shareholders on earth.
Collective economics. Collective economics. Wilson stresses cooperation. They're cooperating through their economic networks, through their institutions. He argues successful economic groups organize collectively through partnerships, investment pools, business associations, credit unions, cooperatives, long-term planning, what we're seeing right on this video. Economic power grows through coordinated effort rather than isolated individual success. Economic power grows through coordinated effort rather than isolated individual success. Let's continue.
Technically, it doesn't own those shares, but it does control the voting power behind them. And that gives it a voice in some of the most powerful boardrooms in the world. BlackRock has been called the world's biggest shadow bank by economic analysts, and there have been laws proposed to rein them in. Shadow banks, firms that act like banks but aren't bound by the same rules, include hedge funds and investment giants like BlackRock. They move massive amounts of money through the system, but without the same oversight. And critics like Katie Porter and Elizabeth Warren warned that that could make them a financial time bomb just waiting to go off. The proposal was to subject them to many of the same regulations as banks, providing an extra safety net should the bottom fall out. But none of those laws have been passed yet, especially since its influence is in every corner. While the world tends to have a short memory, BlackRock still has a lot of influence from its time helping out the U.S. economy. This has helped it to maintain favorable regulations, such as the ones that allow for common ownership, one of the key parts of its success. This happens when competitors within a market sector have the same shareholders, making them less competitive than coexisting. This can help to provide market stability, but it can also reduce market competition and make it less likely the companies will feel the need to aggressively try to win customers over. While BlackRock only owns small percentages of each company and is nowhere close to a monopoly, it still has a stake in almost all major companies succeeding. And it's not afraid to take advantage of those government ties. BlackRock doesn't make the news all that often, but when it does, it's rarely for a positive reason.
Economic planning. Economic planning. Wilson criticizes short-term thinking that Black people as a whole do. Power requires 10-year plans, 25-year plans, 50-year plans, intergenerational planning. Successful communities often make investments whose greatest benefits will be realized by future generations. How many, I've said it before and I say it again, how many of us are willing to sacrifice for a future that we won't live to see?
The company tends to be nearly immune to economic shakeups due to its cautious investing, which is why it's so sought after. But there are some shakeups that everyone feels, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, BlackRock came under scrutiny for performing particularly well during the chaos. It has close ties to the Federal Reserve, and many critics saw the new investments it received during this period as far exceeding those of its competitors. BlackRock promised not to seek profit from these investments beyond its regular fees and released the contract publicly, but that didn't quiet the critics, especially when you look a little deeper into its portfolio. BlackRock is usually an equal opportunity investor, but that doesn't always pass muster with the critics. For a long time, BlackRock has been hit hard for its investments into businesses that people say harm the public good. This was most prominent when it came to environmental impact, because energy companies are always good business. After all, no matter how miserable things are, people will still have to get to work. And BlackRock was one of the world's largest investors in coal-fired power plants, as well as having hefty investments in oil and gas. All of these are seen as fossil fuel nightmares which speed up climate change and harm the environment. So it's no surprise then that BlackRock has come under heavy fire. Groups like the Sierra Club have called BlackRock the single biggest driver of climate destruction on the planet due to its refusal to divest from fossil fuel companies. The company has faced large in-person protests outside its headquarters in New York and London, and CEO Larry Fink eventually promised to cut back on its fossil fuel investments. Its program to create sustainable investment funds gained it some positive PR, but it was only temporary, as climate activists looked to the new funds and then found that some had been mislabeled. And it's not the only area where people say BlackRock's investments are making the world worse. BlackRock primarily invests in companies where they know business will be steady, and there's always business in guns. Hunting and home defense aren't going away anytime soon, even in the event of, and some would say especially in, a recession. BlackRock's stake in gunmaker Sturm Ruger raised more than a few eyebrows, but it also pours money into retail giants like Walmart and into companies like American Outdoor Brands and Vista Outdoor, all with deep ties to the firearms industry. The result was a wave of backlash from anti-gun activists. Under pressure, BlackRock offered gun-free investment options, portfolios that avoid those stocks entirely. And BlackRock might be seeing the heat building, but it's getting it from all sides. The company has put greater focus in recent years on ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. This investment principle prioritizes ethics and responsibility in investing and generally means divesting from some of those problematic firms. Some companies in BlackRock's orbit have cut ties completely, like Dick's Sporting Goods, which walked away from the gun business entirely. BlackRock, though, has taken a softer approach. Instead of divesting, it's tried to distance itself, reducing exposure to fossil fuels and gun-linked firms, and creating ethical options for investors who want a cleaner conscience. But even that might be a step too far for many people. There have been many people concerned about BlackRock's influence and pressing for divestment, but the biggest loss they took came from an unexpected source. In the 2020s, BlackRock's modest moves toward ESG caused them to lose critical state contracts with conservative states. West Virginia fully banned BlackRock from doing business with state institutions in June 2022. Louisiana stripped it of $794 million in funding due to its support of ESG and green energy. In Florida, the state's chief financial officer divested the state of $2 billion in BlackRock investments. But sometimes, the firm's dealings with the government are what raises the biggest red flags. BlackRock also has heavy investments in the defense sector, particularly in defense contractor Northrop Grumman, which produces some of the U.S. government's top state-of-the-art weapons. This has led to many people casting BlackRock as part of the government's war machine, and it hasn't made any moves to divest from that sector yet. This one might put it between a rock and a hard place. After all, it doesn't want to come under fire from activists, but it also wants to maintain friendly relations with the federal government, especially as it expands its portfolio out of the United States. BlackRock's success with working with top investors has given it the resources to expand, but one of those expansions is raising tensions with the government. In 2021, it set up its first mutual fund in China, becoming the first foreign company allowed to operate an independent business in this industry. But it took heavy heat from both the right and left for this expansion due to controversy over the Chinese Communist Party's human rights abuse, particularly relating to the treatment of the Uyghur minority group in Xinjiang. This led to a congressional hearing into BlackRock's investment, but the company insisted its investments were legal. And at a certain point, the controversies just create themselves. BlackRock has its fingers in just about every pie, and that means that according to some people, any ill in the world can be partially attributed to it. In recent years, a conspiracy has started spreading that BlackRock is the source of the skyrocketing house prices, which are keeping many millennials and Gen Z from getting their first homes. The theory goes that BlackRock is buying up most of the houses on the market and raising the prices to consolidate control over the housing market. There is just one problem: this isn't happening. BlackRock isn't out there buying up individual houses, at least not directly. Its footprint in housing comes through mortgage securities, apartment complexes, and the construction firms building new developments.
So what we're seeing here, and you pretty much get the point in that video. But what we're seeing here is how power is actually accumulated and used. Real power, white power, how it really works, how this one company controls all these different things, all these different aspects across the globe, funneling their power through institutions. That's what Dr. Wilson is talking about, getting us to understand how power, economics, the system of white supremacy, how these things really work. Now, I'll finish up these key points and then we're going to round this thing on out. But I wanted to play that video so we can have a better understanding of what Dr. Wilson is talking about when he's talking about the power of institutions, the power of economics, the politics behind it, the psychology behind it, right? So this next key point is education must produce producers, right? Wilson criticizes educational systems that prepare students only to seek employment. He argues education should also cultivate entrepreneurship, ownership, engineering, finance, manufacturing, agricultural knowledge, and institutional leadership. His emphasis is on developing the capacity to build and sustain organizations, build and sustain industries. Psychological barriers that we have, right? Wilson also discusses the dimension of economics, right? He argues many people have been conditioned to admire visible symbols of wealth while paying less attention to the systems that create wealth. Read that again. Wilson argues that many people have been conditioned to admire visible symbols of wealth while paying less attention to the systems that create wealth. In this framework, the focus should shift from appearance to productive capacity and ownership. Like I was saying earlier, we want to look like we're wealthy while being poor. So I got the Benz. I may have the house, or I may have some images of a house. I may have the clothes, the look, and all these things here, but I'm not wealthy. I'm a high earner, but I own nothing and I control nothing. And if anything real happens, I'm back to being broke. But not me particularly, but you get it. Political power follows economic power. Wilson argues politicians often respond to organized economic interests because those interests can finance campaigns, create jobs, influence investment, and mobilize institutions. His point is that durable political influence generally rests on organized economic strength. Information is economic power. Remember that. Knowledge has economic value, and applied knowledge is economic power. Applied knowledge has economic value. Research creates innovation. Innovation creates products. Products create industries. Industries create wealth. Wilson therefore sees research, science, engineering, and education as economic assets rather than merely academic pursuits. And if you pay attention to what goes on around you, I'm in a college town. Dr. Wilson is correct. Florida State University is the most powerful institution in this city. Florida State University is the most powerful institution in this city. If you want anything done, if Florida State don't want it done, it ain't gonna happen. The most powerful, wealthiest, and organized institution in this city is Florida State University. Get your mind right. So remember this. Dr. Wilson isn't telling us to chase money. He's teaching us to build power. Money can disappear overnight, but institutions, productive capacity, and organized communities can shape generations. His challenge is to stop measuring success only by individual income and start asking who owns, who produces, who plans, and who controls the institutions that determine your future. Get your mind right. Once again, Blueprint for Black Power, a moral, political, and economic imperative for the 21st century. That's the end of chapter 12. Chapter 13, we are starting on, and it goes from page 295 to 306. So make sure you are caught up, ready. If you don't have your copy, link is in the description so you can get your copy. I am Joseph Ward. This is On the Shoulders of Giants, and we're over here to make sure we have our information in place so we can go offline and build real power. With that being said, I love you all. Make sure you catch the next video coming up. Make sure you like this video, comment, hype, share, and subscribe to this channel if you're not already. If you're not, you tripping. Great information over here. All right. Y'all be blessed.